Have you ever wondered how the people of the Middle Ages coped with the harsh winter? Without central heating, supermarkets, and modern technology, every cold season was a real test of endurance. But even so, with the arrival of short days and long nights, the hearts and homes of the English peasantry were alive with hope and celebration. Winter holidays in the Middle Ages were not just a cause for joy. They were a vital survival mechanism that brought communities together, strengthened the spirit, and helped them survive the darkest times of the year. It was more than just food. It was a celebration of resilience, solidarity, and the triumph of the human spirit over adversity. We'll take a trip back in time to uncover 10 surprising and often forgotten facts about how medieval Englishmen celebrated winter. These facts will reveal not only unique recipes and customs, but also show how deeply the holidays were woven into the very fabric of their existence. Get ready to learn about unexpected aspects of their cooking, social rituals, and the amazing ingenuity that allowed them to find joy even in the harshest of environments. Unlike the modern idea of festive gluttony as a luxury, for medieval peasants, a plentiful meal on winter holidays was a vital necessity. After the autumn slaughtering of livestock and harvesting, it was at this time of year that they had a unique opportunity to get enough protein and fat, which were scarce for most of the year. Meat, especially pork, beef, and game, if you're lucky with hunting, was prepared in large quantities. It was a strategic store of energy that allowed the body to store calories to fight off cold and disease. Such a belly festival was not just a feast, but a critical stage in preparation for the most severe period of winter, when supplies were depleted and food became scarce. This period of abundance, often timed to coincide with Christmas, then called Yule or midwinter, was the culmination of the agricultural year. During the summer and autumn, the peasants worked hard to provide themselves with food for the long months ahead. The slaughter of cattle was not just a routine procedure, but a whole event, since meat could not be stored for a long time without special preservation methods. That is why a significant portion of fresh meat was consumed immediately, turning into lavish feasts. Pork, due to its high fat content, was a particularly valuable source of energy and heat. It was prepared in the form of sausages, smoked meats, and salted bacon. But the most delicious parts were eaten fresh. This was a time when the stomach was filled to capacity, giving the body strength to withstand low temperatures and physical exertion. The accumulated calories were vital, as the months ahead of them were when the diet became much more lean. The lack of fresh vegetables and fruits and limited access to fish in frozen reservoirs meant that the body had to rely on internal reserves. Fats not only provided energy, but also created a subcutaneous layer that served as a natural insulation. In addition, protein-rich food helped maintain muscle mass, which was critical for continuing hard physical labor, even in the cold season. The holiday thus served not only a social and spiritual function, but also a purely biological one, ensuring the survival of the individual and the community as a whole. It was a deliberate, if intuitive, use of resources to maximize the UI's chances of getting through the winter safely. Slaughtering livestock in autumn was not only a way to get fresh meat for the feast, but also a necessity due to the limited food supply in winter. It was impossible to keep a large herd throughout the winter due to a lack of hay and grain, so some of the animals were intended for slaughter. The choice of animals for slaughter was a strategic decision. Usually young but well-fed individuals were chosen, as well as old or weak animals that would not survive the winter. Blood, entrails, and fat were also completely used. Black puddings were made from the blood, pats and minced meat were made from the entrails, and the fat was heated and stored for culinary purposes and lighting. Not a single piece was wasted, which emphasizes the maximum efficiency of using resources in the peasant economy. The winter feast also served as a kind of respite before the upcoming hardships. It was a psychologically important moment when people could relax, enjoy the abundance, and forget about the upcoming difficulties. This emotional boost helped them gain strength to deal with the cold, disease, and monotony of winter life. Public meals, especially large ones, strengthened social ties within the community. Sharing food symbolized unity, mutual aid, and solidarity, which was essential for survival in an environment where everyone depended on their neighbor. People exchanged news, shared stories, sang songs, and played games, creating an atmosphere of warmth and comfort that compensated for the harshness of the environment. It was a celebration of community and collective resilience. The culinary traditions of this period also reflected practicality. Meals were often prepared in large cauldrons or stoves, which required less fuel and made it possible to cook food for many people at once. Meat casseroles, stews, sausages, patties, all these were nutritious and warming dishes that could be prepared in advance and reheated as needed. Long-term stewing and cooking allowed the use of tougher parts of the meat, making them soft and edible. It was an example of culinary adaptation to available resources and technologies. Being able to use every product efficiently, from meat to bones to offal, was key to survival. Thus, the Belly Festival was not just a manifestation of joy, but a complex, multifunctional phenomenon that integrated economic, social, biological, and psychological aspects of the life of a medieval peasant. Disposable tableware is not a modern invention. In the Middle Ages, so-called trenchettes, or trenchers, were widely used thick slices of yesterday's bread that served as plates. Meat, stews, and other dishes were placed on them. After the food was eaten, the juice-soaked bread was either eaten by the poor, given to the beggars at the castle door, or fed to the munchkins. Thus, not a single piece of food was wasted, and bread, which today is perceived as a self-sufficient product, performed a double function, demonstrating the amazing economy and waste-free nature of medieval farming. It was an example of not only practicality, but also a kind of social distribution of food. Trenchettes were not just a cost-effective solution, but also a part of everyday culture. They were usually made from coarse, stale bread, which was not suitable for fresh consumption. The thickness of the slice could reach several centimeters so that it could withstand the weight of the food and not get soaked too quickly. For the nobility, these bread plates might have been more refined, made of white bread, but the essence remained the same. After the meal, when the bread absorbed meat juices and fat, it became more flavorful and nutritious. This turns it from a simple stand into a valuable product. The system for distributing trenchettes after the feast was well established. For the poor, it was a way to get nutritious food that they couldn't otherwise afford. For the owners, it was an act of charity and piety, which improved their reputation and, as C.C. believed, brought a blessing. Giving leftovers to animals, pigs or dogs, was part of a general waste-free economy, where each resource was used to the maximum. This method emphasizes the absence of waste and a deep understanding of the value of food in an environment where every harvest and every slaughter was the result of hard work and life's necessities. Thus, trenchettes became a symbol not only of thrift, but also of a social structure where waste from one class became food for another. This practice of using bread plates was common throughout medieval Europe, from peasant huts to royal castles, although the quality of bread, of course, varied greatly. For farmers whose bread was mostly rye or barley, coarse and dense, trenchettes were the perfect solution. They not only replaced expensive ceramic or wooden dishes, but also provided an additional source of calories. After use, the bread soaked in juice and fat became a real treat for the poor, who could finish it or take it home. This was an example of efficient food waste management, which is now gaining popularity again in the context of the sustainable consumption. The use of trenchettes also had its own hygienic advantages. Unlike reusable dishes, which required washing and water and detergents were scarce, bread plates were disposable. This reduced the spread of diseases, as each serving was served on a relatively clean surface. Of course, hygiene in the Middle Ages was far from modern standards, but this method was a step towards improving it. In addition, trenchettes were easy to make. Anyone who knew how to bake bread could make them. This made them a universal and affordable solution for all layers of society, regardless of their wealth. This custom also reflects a deep respect for bread, which was considered the foundation of life and a symbol of God's gift. The use of bread as a dish and then its full consumption emphasized its sacred status and did not allow a single crumb to be wasted. In an environment of constant struggle for survival, where every crop was the result of hard work and depended on the mercy of nature, waste was unthinkable. The trinkets were a vivid example of the practical wisdom of medieval people. Their ability to find simple but ingenious solutions to complex problems, using available resources to the maximum advantage. It was a system that worked at all levels: economic, social, and even symbolic, strengthening the community and ensuring survival. Today we add spices for flavor, but in the Middle Ages they played a much more important role. Ginger, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg. These exotic spices were incredibly expensive and testified to the status. But for farmers, they were also of practical importance in preserving and masking the taste of not always fresh products. In winter, when fresh meat was a rarity, and most of the stocks were subjected to long-term storage, salting, smoking, spices helped to improve the taste and smell, and also, importantly, had antibacterial properties. This was especially valuable for festive dishes that could be prepared in advance. Thus, spices were not only a symbol of prosperity, but also an important tool for ensuring the safety and taste of food in the absence of refrigerators. The cost of spices in the Middle Ages was comparable to the cost of gold, and the trade routes through which they were delivered were carefully guarded. However, even at the peasant level, where access to exotic spices was extremely limited, milky analogs were used, herbs, roots, berries that had similar properties. Wild garlic, juniper, thyme, rosemary, mint. These plants were collected and dried to be used in winter. They not only improved the taste, but also, as is now known, contain phytoncides and other compounds that slow down food spoilage. Taste masking was particularly relevant for meat that could have been salted or smoked using primitive methods. Over time, such meat could acquire a specific, not always pleasant smell and taste. The spices helped to clog up these undesirable notes, making the food more appetizing and edible. Moreover, many spices stimulate digestion, which was important when eating heavy fatty foods. Winter holidays were a time when even farmers could afford to add a little luxury to their dishes in the form of local but flavorful additives. This was not just a culinary study, but a conscious approach to improving the quality and safety of food products in conditions of limited opportunities. The use of spices in medieval cuisine was multifaceted. In addition to their role in preserving and improving taste, they were often credited with medicinal and magical properties. It was believed that certain spices could heal diseases, strengthen the body, and even protect against evil spirits. For example, ginger was used to warm the body, which was especially valuable in the cold season. Cinnamon and cloves were believed to aid digestion and relieve stomach aches. These beliefs, although not always scientifically based by modern standards, made spices even more valuable in the eyes of people. Thus, their application went beyond the purely culinary, affecting aspects of health and well-being. The use of spices also depended on social status. The nobles could afford the rarest and most expensive spices from the East, using them in huge quantities to showcase their wealth. The peasants were limited to local herbs and spices that could be gathered in the forest or grown in the garden. However, both valued them for their ability to transform food. This differentiation in access to spices created another dimension in medieval society, where even the scents on the table spoke of a person's position. However, regardless of the origin, the functional role of spices as helpers in survival and health remained unchanged. Cookbooks of the time, although intended for the nobility, contain many recipes where spices play a central role. They were often used not individually, but in complex mixtures, creating unique taste profiles characteristic of middle-century cuisine. This was due not only to the desire to create delicious dishes, but also to an attempt to maximize their preservation and taste qualities. For example, meat pies were added not only pepper, but also cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, which may seem unusual for modern taste, but then it was the norm. Thus, spices were not just an additive, but a key element that shaped the character of medieval food, its safety and symbolic significance on the festive table. The traditional English meat pies that were the centerpiece of the winter feast often contained more than just meat. In the late Middle Ages, surprise pies appeared, where in addition to the filling, live birds, swallows or starlings, were placed which flew out when cutting the pie, or even small figures symbolizing good luck or prosperity. It was not just entertainment, but part of a festive ritual designed to surprise guests and enhance the sense of wonder and abundance. Such cakes, despite their apparent exoticism, were part of a broader tradition of displaying generosity and prosperity, especially at the tables of the nobility. But their idea also permeated peasant customs, albeit in a simplified form. Surprise pies were, in fact, a form of theatrical performance designed to entertain guests and create an atmosphere of magic at the feast. Although the most developed versions with live birds were the prerogative of the nobility and kings, the peasants could also create their own, more modest versions. For example, a coin could be baked in a large pie, and whoever found it was considered lucky of the year. Or inside, there could be small figures made of dough, symbolizing good luck, health, or fertility. It was a way to bring an element of play and surprise to a festive meal that could otherwise be quite monotonous. Such elements were essential for maintaining morale and hope in the midst of a hard life. They were a reminder that even in the harshest of times, there is room for wonder and joy. The symbolism of the surprise cake was deeply rooted in the beliefs of Togo and Remy. Flying birds could symbolize the release of the spirit or the return of spring, and the found figurines, an omen of a good harvest or a prosperous year. These rituals strengthened community bonds, creating shared memories and shared emotions. They were a form of social glue that held peasant society together, giving the holidays an extra, intangible meaning that went beyond mere satiation. The idea of a surprise cake is rooted in older carnival and folklore traditions, where elements of surprise and symbolic magic played an important role in the festivities. For the nobles, this was an opportunity to showcase their extravagance and abundance, showing that they could afford even such unusual entertainment. Imagine the surprise and laughter of the guests when a flock of live birds suddenly flew out of a massive pie while cutting it. This was a truly memorable moment that was discussed by the Shia long after the feast. Such spectacles were part of a sumptuous banquet, where the food was not only for satiation, but also to demonstrate power and position. For the peasants, of course, such grandiose surprises were not available. However, they found their own, more modest, but no less significant ways to add an element of miracle to the festive meal. In addition to coins and figures made of dough, inside the cake could be baked beans, nuts, or even small dried flowers, each of which had its own symbolic meaning: fertility, wealth, strong marriage. Finding such a treasure in your piece of cake was considered a sign of special favor of fate and a harbinger of good luck for the whole coming year. This added an element of interactivity and divination to the holiday, turning ordinary food into a kind of divination. The symbolism of the surprise cake was deeply connected with the cycle of nature and the desire for abundance. The birds flying out of the pie could represent the rebirth of life after winter, the arrival of spring and fertility. It was a message of hope in the darkest period of the year. The cake itself, as a closed form, symbolized hidden opportunities and treasures that will be revealed in the future. When life was full of uncertainty and dependent on the grace of nature, such rituals gave people a sense of control and anticipation of a miracle, helping them cope with everyday difficulties. It was not just a culinary experience, but a deeply rooted cultural and religious way to build community spirit and get through the winter with optimism. Sugar was a luxury not available to most, but honey and ale, weak beer, were ubiquitous sources of carbohydrates and energy. Honey was used to sweeten food and beverages, and also as a preservative. Ale, which was brewed from grain, was the main drink, safer to drink than water from questionable sources and rich in calories. In the winter months, these products were especially valuable. Honey strengthened the immune system, and ale, in addition to being nutritious, created a feeling of warmth and relaxation, which was important for maintaining morale on cold and dark days. The consumption of ale was part of everyday culture, and on holidays it was drunk in large quantities, sometimes even with the addition of spices, turning it into a kind of winter mulled wine. Honey was one of the few available sweeteners, and its healing properties have been known since ancient times. It was used not only for food, but also as a medicine for colds and other ailments, which was especially important in the cold season. Beekeeping was developed everywhere, and almost every peasant family could have their own hives. Mead, a honey-based drink, was also popular, especially on holidays, adding another degree of fun and warmth. Ale, in turn, was such a fundamental element of the diet that it was often referred to as liquid bread. Due to the poor quality of water contaminated with sewage and the lack of treatment facilities, it was dangerous to drink water. The fermentation process of brewing ale destroyed most of the harmful bacteria, making it a much safer drink. In addition, the ale was nutritious. It contained B vitamins derived from yeast and calories from grain. On winter days, ale, especially warmed or spiced, created a sense of inner warmth and relaxation, which helped to cope with physical discomfort and psychological stress caused by cold and darkness. Holiday ales could be stronger or more flavorful, brewed specifically for such occasions in order to enhance the feeling of celebration and abundance. Honey, in addition to its obvious nutritional qualities, had proven antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties. This made it valuable not only as a sweet product, but also as a part of traditional medicine. In winter, when the immune system was weak and colds and infections were common, honey was used to relieve sore throats, coughs, and as a general tonic. Bee hopping was an important part of the peasant economy, and hives were often placed near the house. The production of their own honey and wax gave the peasants not only food and light, but also a kind of home first aid kit. Mead, an ancient alcoholic beverage, was more accessible to the peasants than wine, and was often prepared for the holidays, adding warmth and fun. Ale was so important that it was brewed in almost every household, often several times a week. Its strength could vary from a light, everyday drink for children and adults to a stronger, festive ale. It is important to note that even the lightest ale was significantly safer to drink than water from wells or rivers that might have been contaminated. The fermentation process pasteurized the water and created an environment unsuitable for many pathogens. In addition, the caloric content of ale was significant, which made it an important source of energy in the diet, especially during heavy physical labor. On winter holidays, ale was often served warmed, sometimes with spices such as nutmeg, cinnamon, or ginger, making it the equivalent of modern mulled wine. It was a way not only to warm up, but also to give the drink a more festive taste. Such warming drinks were especially valuable in cold, unheated homes. Drinking ale wasn't just about quenching thirst or hunger, it was a social ritual. Mugs of ale were passed around, symbolizing community and camaraderie. Thus, honey and ale were not just products, but vital elements of medieval culture, ensuring not only physical survival, but also maintaining the spirit in harsh winter conditions. In the Middle Ages, there were no individual kitchens in the modern sense. The preparation of festive dishes, especially those that required a lot of time and effort, for example, slaughtering livestock, cooking sausages, smoking meat, baking large amounts of bread, was often a collective event. Neighbors and relatives gathered together to help each other. It was not only a way to distribute labor, but also a fundamental social ritual that strengthened ties in the community. Women were united for cooking, men for cutting and harvesting. This joint action created a sense of belonging, mutual assistance, and anticipation of the holiday, which was no less important than the food itself for survival in harsh conditions. Cooking in the Middle Ages was extremely time-consuming, especially when it came to a large amount of food for the holiday. Meat preparations, such as sausages, pâtés, or smoked meats, required a lot of hands. Some crushed meat, others prepared spices, others stuffed shells. The same applied to bread baking, which often took place in communal ovens or required assistance in kneading a huge amount of dough. This collective effort not only streamlined the process, but also created an atmosphere of camaraderie and solidarity. Cooking together was a time for sharing news, gossip, jokes, and songs. It strengthened social ties, resolved minor conflicts, and created a sense of shared purpose. Women shared recipes and cooking secrets. Men discussed farming and cattle breeding in surveys. This ritual was especially important in winter, when communal life in general froze due to the cold. General cooking sessions served as a kind of social heating, warming not only the body, but also the soul. They reminded each member of the community of their place and role, confirming their belonging to the collective, which was vital for survival in conditions where individual existence was almost impossible. In medieval peasant life, where resources were limited and labor was hard, mutual aid was not just a virtue, but a necessity. Cooking together, especially before important winter holidays, was a clear manifestation of this mutual assistance. For example, someone could have a large oven, someone a large smokehouse, and someone navy key in cutting carcasses. By joining forces, farmers were able to make effective use of their available resources and knowledge, which allowed them to prepare much more food in better quality than if each worked alone. It was a kind of collective production of the holiday where everyone made their own contribution. In addition to the purely practical aspects, these joint cooking sessions played a huge role in preserving and transmitting culinary traditions and recipes. Young girls learned from experienced women, observing their work and helping them. Recipes were not written down, but passed down by word of mouth, from mother to daughter, from neighbor to neighbor. This ensured the continuity of the culinary heritage and preserved the unique milky features. Thus, cooking was not only a labor, but also a process of learning and cultural exchange. These communal rituals were especially important in winter, when people spent more time indoors and could feel isolated. Joint work created opportunities for communication and entertainment, which helped to combat the winter blues and boredom. They told stories, sang songs, and exchanged gossip and news from neighboring villages. It was a kind of social fuel that kept the community spirit alive during the long, cold months. The sense of belonging and solidarity generated by these shared activities was just as important for survival as the food itself, as it strengthened social bonds and morale, making the collective more resilient to adversity. After a large meal, especially in winter when physical activity was limited, games, dancing, and singing were an integral part of the holiday. It was not only fun, but also a practical way to get your blood flowing, warm up, and help your digestion. Medieval feasts could last for hours, and after a plentiful meal, especially fat and dense ones, physical activity was essential. Dancing around the campfire, folk games, singing ballads and hymns created a warm, lively atmosphere that helped fight the cold and boredom. These activities contributed not only to physical well-being, but also to psychological well-being, strengthening a sense of community and joy. Winter holidays were often accompanied by ritual games, which could have symbolic meaning associated with fertility, good luck, or scaring away evil spirits. For example, ball games, tug-of-war, various types of strength and agility competitions. They not only entertained, but also served as a form of physical activity, which was especially important after sitting at the table for a long time. The movement stimulated blood circulation, helping the body digest heavy food and generate heat. Singing and dancing, in turn, were not just the background, but the active participation of everyone. Folk songs and ballads were passed down from generation to generation, preserving history and traditions. Often these were songs related to the harvest, love, or heroic deeds. Car cross-country dances and other group movements created physical intimacy that provided additional warmth. The festive atmosphere, filled with laughter, music, and movement, was a powerful antidepressant in the winter blues and isolation. It was a way not only to keep warm physically, but also to maintain mental health, strengthen the spirit of the community, and survive the cold period with maximum stamina. Despite the abundance of meat, root vegetables, and cabbage played a huge role in the winter diet. Carrots, parsnips, turnips, onions, and cabbage were well stored in cold cellars and were a major source of vitamins and minerals that prevented scurvy and other diseases caused by nutrient deficiencies. It was also added to all kinds of stews, chowders, and even served as side dishes to meat. Of particular importance was sauerkraut, which, thanks to fermentation, preserved vitamin C and was available throughout the winter. Thus, despite the apparent simplicity, the peasant cuisine was surprisingly balanced, intuitively compensating for the lack of some products with an abundance of others. The cultivation of root vegetables and cabbage was the mainstay of peasant agriculture, since these crops adapted well to the local climate and could be stored for a long time. Harvesting root crops in the fall was one of the most important events, as it depended on the nutrition of the family for the whole winter. Cabbage, in particular, was incredibly versatile. It could be eaten fresh, stewed, added to soups, and most importantly, fermented. The process of sauerkraut was widespread and allowed to preserve its nutritional properties, especially vitamin C, which was vital for preventing scurvy, a disease that often affects people in the winter months due to the lack of fresh fruits and vegetables. Root vegetables such as turnips and parsnips were highly nutritious, containing carbohydrates that provide energy and fiber that promotes healthy digestion. Onions and garlic, also well preserved, were used not only as condiments, but also as folk remedies to fight colds and infections, which were especially common in winter. The combination of meat with copious amounts of root vegetables and cabbage in stews and chowders created full-fledged, satisfying dishes that provided the necessary nutrients and heat. This intuitive approach to nutrition, based on centuries of experience, demonstrates farmers' deep understanding of what their bodies need to survive, even without modern knowledge of vitamins and minerals. Fat obtained from slaughtering animals was an extremely valuable resource. Not only was it used for cooking, but it was also preserved for lighting, tallow candles, and even for skincare. In winter, when the skin cracked from cold and wind, animal fat, lard, it could be used as a protective balm. This demonstrates the complete utilization of all resources and the versatility of products in the medieval economy. No part of the animal was wasted, and fat, in addition to its culinary value, was an important element of survival in harsh conditions, providing warmth and protection from the elements in the most unexpected forms. In the Middle Ages, fat was a universal product whose value was incomparable with the modern attitude to it. In addition to being used in food where it was used for frying, baking, and adding salinity to dishes, animal fat was the main source of light in homes. Tallow candles made from melted animal fat were the most affordable means of lighting after sunset. In the absence of electricity and kerosene, these candles were indispensable, allowing you to extend the time of wakefulness and work on dark winter evenings. In addition, fat played an important role in hygiene and body care. In the cold season, when heating was minimal and the skin was constantly exposed to frost and wind, it often became dry and cracked. Animal lard applied to the skin created a protective barrier, preventing moisture loss and frostbite. It was also used to treat shoes, making them more waterproof, which was critical for protecting the feet from the wet and cold. Thus, fat was not just a high-calorie product, but a multifunctional element that provided warmth, light, and protection, demonstrating the amazing ingenuity of farmers in using each resource to survive in harsh winter conditions. Before the advent of the modern Christmas calendar, medieval peasants could use their own, simpler version. In some traditions, a large holiday loaf, or special loaf, was baked at the beginning of Advent, the period before Christmas. They cut off a piece of it every day, marking the approach of the holiday. It was not only a way to control supplies, but also a symbolic ritual that created a sense of anticipation and connected everyday life with the upcoming celebration. This bread calendar was a simple but effective way to keep up the spirit and remind you of future abundance in times of scarcity. This tradition of holiday bread was closely linked to the agricultural cycle and religious beliefs. Advent was a period of fasting and waiting, and the big bread symbolized future benefits. It was baked with special herbs or additives that give it unique taste and aroma. Nibbling a piece every day was a ritual that filled the weight with meaning and created a sense of gradually approaching the holiday. It helped to count down the days during the period when life was monotonous and hard, giving people something to digest and anticipation. Moreover, this bread could be not just a symbol, but also a real source of food during the most meager days of Advent, when food was especially scarce. Thus, it served a dual function, spiritual and practical. It served as a reminder that after the period of deprivation, there will be a time of abundance and joy. It was an ingenious way to integrate everyday needs with religious observances, creating a unique Christmas calendar that reflected the essence of medieval peasant life, a mixture of survival, hope, and belief in the best. Winter holidays in medieval England were much more than just a feast. They were the culmination of an annual cycle, a moment when the community came together to celebrate the harvest, survive, and strengthen its bonds in the face of the inevitable challenges. The recipes and traditions we've reviewed demonstrate remarkable ingenuity, adaptability, and a deep understanding of the world around us. Farmers made the most of every available resource, turning simple foods into the basis for survival and celebration. These feasts were not only about food, but also about overcoming adversity together, about the resilience of the human spirit, and about the joy that can be found in unity and community. It was a true victory of life over cold, hunger, and loneliness. Studying these traditions allows us to better understand how strong the human connection with nature was and how important the role of the community was in survival. If you were interested in delving into these forgotten pages of history and learning about the extraordinary life of medieval peasants, subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on exciting new research. Tell us in the comments which of the facts surprised you the most.